I've only got 5 minutes, so no niceties. So I hope the Reverend Father and the Minister and the TDs and anybody else that expects a bit of protocol, they're not going to get any. So straight into business, right? In looking at the topic of the panel debate, I have to say that I'm much more focused on Ireland of today, the part that says today, and indeed the shaping of the Ireland of tomorrow than the 1840s. And Dermot said that he was a historian. I'm by no means a historian, but I do acknowledge, being the Chief Executive of the Heritage Council, that we're in a much better position to shape the future of our nation if we understand its past, if we understand its heritage. And in using the word heritage, I have to say that I mean both our natural and our cultural heritage. And perhaps it's the erstwhile ecologist in me, but I oftentimes bemoan and get myself into rather heated debates and trouble by debating with so-called experts about the divisive sort of administrative and professional barriers that we actually place between nature and culture. And as a result, we place between people and their place. Because to put it bluntly, culture and nature are absolutely inextricably linked. And the values, and Jack talked about values, the values we attach to them will be actually greatly enhanced across all spectrums if we advocate on that basis. It's my conviction, and unlike James Fintan, I didn't have to fall out with my father or, God forbid, actually write to a Tory Prime Minister to make my point, that we cannot any longer, in any overall sort of strategic government policy context that makes sense, separate out those aspects of our natural and cultural heritage. And I have to say that's not just a mad Michael moment, as you might think, because I'll paraphrase a recent communication from no less venerable organisation than the EU. In essence, that stated that the heritage sector must adapt business models, develop new professional skills, pardon the jargon, but it's their jargon, working with authorities, not through one-off isolated interventions, but actually by making heritage, and here's where the thing gets interesting, heritage part of a broader long-term development planning process. So the EU Commission gets it, and ultimately I think our politicians will get it, which ultimately means that if we value our heritage, the true way to realise its potential is to adopt new models. And Micheál Martin has already said the political system has failed and we need to radically overhaul that. And we need to do the same with regard to the structures with which we deal with heritage. To evolve and develop the old ones is perhaps one solution, but it has to be radical and it has to be meaningful. So where does all this come from? Well, the very first chairperson of the Heritage Council, Frida Rowntree, who came not a million miles away from this neck of the woods in County Offaly, stated that the mechanisms that the state has put in place since its establishment have disenfranchised people from their heritage. She went on to say that the job of the Heritage Council was to work with all its partners to put in place mechanisms that gave it back to people and gave it back to communities. So from the point of view of the Heritage Council, we've been working for about the last 19 years now in building and demonstrating what is possible. And yet the value of that work is not yet matched by the resources required to allow it to reach its full potential, nor is there an understanding, in deference to the political people here, at a political level of what that potential is. But we all have to continue to work to correct that fact, because, and politicians know this more than anyone else, communities throughout Ireland are clamouring for change, for mechanisms to secure, in my instance, my background, to secure the benefits and local development that can be derived from relatively small, ongoing investment in their natural, built and cultural heritage, their heritage. Heritage is, and anyone that's been associated with Laois, through the County Heritage Forum, through the County Heritage Officer, through the local authority, know that heritage is at the essence of discussions around people and place, sustaining urban and rural landscapes and how we feel about where we live. Let's look at the competitive advantages conferred by cultural distinctiveness. It's well known. I don't intend to go into any sort of facts and figures here. But it's central. It's central to our tourism industry. It's central to our agricultural industry. It creates jobs, and yet we don't invest in the communities that can deliver it. So the Heritage Council is now approaching its 20th birthday, And our current chairman has recently stated that whilst we may have played a part in the last 20 years, the last couple of decades, in supporting, creating and imagining a new community-based heritage infrastructure, our key aspiration over the next 10 years, the next 20 years, has to be to make that actually greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that's the sort of thing that even Jack was referring to, that we need to be doing at a society level. The same as usual will not do. And it was actually really nice to see the speech of our President, Michael D. Higgins, recently, he was essentially applying the same adage to our economic recovery. As one reporter said, we seem to be risking returning to a society where we don't know the price, where we know the price of a house, but we do not know the real value of a home. If you apply that to our heritage, we might say we know what our heritage is costing, but we're nowhere near to realising its true value to Ireland as a nation. And putting simply, that's because we don't invest sufficiently in an ongoing and regular manner in the development of societies, of people and of communities who are best placed to ensure its long-term management and conservation. And this too, as other speakers have said, is parallels with the writings and musings of James Fintan Lalor, in that he wanted to extract the tenants of land from the controlling grip of the landlord, to give them some degree of independence, autonomy and right of self-determination. Governance, independence, right of self-determination. After all the recent controversies in the business that I'm in, we could be talking about our cultural institutions, with all due respect. And yet we have to continue to try to effect change. One recent initiative is securing a government commitment to develop a national cultural policy. Easter 2016 is going to mark the anniversary of one of the most significant events in our national history, and it's part of an overall decade of commemorations. That's all sort of coincidental. But we need a natural cultural policy, because any democracy approaching such a stage in its maturity, it's surely appropriate that government recognises the contribution that culture, including our arts, including our heritage, makes to social integration, our sense of well-being, our confidence, our sustainable development as a nation. Certainly the position of the cultural institutions is that the entire cultural sector, driven as it is by citizens, artists, heritage professionals, craftspeople, innovators, entrepreneurs, they must be the people that play a part in developing such a policy. It cannot be made up by a government department. Culture is complex, and having confidence in the process for developing a natural culture policy is actually more important at this stage than what the policy is likely to contain in the future. Time, Chairman, precludes me from embarking any further in terms of looking at the detail at present, but suffice to say that the view of the cultural institutions and myself personally is that until government has a coherent national cultural policy, all current legislative and government changes that impact on our cultural institutions should be suspended. Thank you very much.